Sometimes our panelists agree, and sometimes they don't. There's people with a lot to say, and others who just say enough. Some who want to ask the hard questions, some who want to avoid them, and some who think they have the answers. They're guaranteed to keep you entertained, whether you agree or not. Politics Live, tomorrow at 12:15 on BBC Two and iPlayer.
Morning. Come and have a seat. Now, of course, I'm not going to go easy on you. There are some really big questions we've got to try and get answers to this morning. But I'll be fair, and we just want to hear what you've got to say. So, shall we get on with it?
We're rolling.
Here we go. Join me to hear from the biggest names inside and outside politics.
Sunday with Laura Koonsberg. Sundays at 9 on BBC One and iPlayer.
I think the first signs that I wanted to be a journalist were, as a kid, I started making pretend reports. I always liked asking a lot of questions. I've had a lot of different jobs in journalism. What I've learned is that it's always about the people. The wildfires was a story I was living through myself.
It is really hard to comprehend how life is ever going to get back to normal.
Going to bed at night, not really knowing what I was going to wake up to. Fires were burning right around us, so we were having to take split-second decisions about how to gather pictures and tell this story. I knew thousands of people were leaving their homes and were probably never going to get to go back to them. And in the middle of that chaos, I had to find ways to talk to people about what they were experiencing.
That was my house.
It's all gone.
I think hearing one person's story helps viewers trust what they're hearing. Because when you can empathise, it helps you get an understanding of the bigger picture.
Hello, welcome to The Context with me, Geeta Goramuthi in London.
I'm Sumi Somaskanda in Washington. This hour we're focusing on President Trump's second term. Tonight, protests against immigration enforcement continue across the U.S., but the president is doubling down on his response.
Left-wing radicals waving foreign flags viciously attacked ICE and Border Patrol agents as well as Los Angeles police officers.
We're coming after all these people, so let's be clear. This is the beginning, not the end.
This was provoked by the White House. When you run armored caravans through our streets, you're not trying to keep anyone safe. You're trying to cause fear and panic.
Joining us tonight are former Democrat Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy and Republican strategist Brian Lanza.
Hello and welcome to The Context. We're taking a look at President Trump's second term.
Later this hour, are US-China trade ties finally on the mend? The president confirms there's a deal for review. We'll unpack what it means for the economy and ordinary Americans.
But first, we start in Los Angeles. It's just about 1 p.m. local time. We're now on the fifth successive day of unrest on the streets. In a moment, we'll hear from our correspondent who is at the scene.
Deep divisions remain over the president's deployment of National Guard and Marines to LA without a request from the California governor, Gavin Newsom, who is totally opposed to the move. A little earlier, we had more detail on what the military will be able to do, with the general leading the deployment of Marines to the city, confirming they could detain but not arrest protesters.
So strictly for the protection of the federal personnel and the protection of the federal building, they're allowed to temporarily detain and wait for law enforcement to come and arrest them. They do not do any arrest. They are strictly there to detain, to wait for law enforcement to come and handle those demonstrators.
Now, on Truth Social, the president doubled down on his decision, while his administration continues to defend the deployment as lawful and constitutional.
But President Trump will never allow mob rule to prevail in America. The most basic duty of government is to preserve law and order, and this administration embraces that sacred responsibility.
Well, the protests began in LA on Friday, but they've since spread to cities in states across the country, such as Texas to the south, Illinois and Washington in the north, and Pennsylvania on the east coast.
And in the last few hours, more developments from some of those mass arrests. The LA County Attorney announced that criminal charges would be filed against 2 men who allegedly threw Molotov cocktails. Authorities warn more charges will come.
Our community must be kept safe for peaceful protests and against thugs and criminals looking to start trouble. We expect more charges to be filed in the coming days and weeks. If you took part in these riots and were looking to cause trouble, we will come looking for you.
Well, Donald Trump says without the deployment of the National Guard, Los Angeles would have burned to the ground, quotes. Well, California's leaders say it is the president who is escalating tensions.
And there was this warning from Governor Gavin Newsom last night.
This is about all of us. This is about you. California may be first, but it clearly will not end here. Other states are next. Democracy is next. Democracy is under assault before our eyes. This moment we have feared has arrived.
Well, we will come to our panel in a moment. First, let's get to the latest from our correspondent, Carl Nasman, who is in downtown LA. Where exactly are you, Carl?
Yeah, we're outside that federal building in downtown Los Angeles. This is where many of those demonstrations have started over the past 5 or 6 days or so. It's a different scene today, a lot calmer than what we've seen over the past couple of days. You can see behind me almost more media gathered here than demonstrators. Small crowd. We have seen that tend to grow, though, as the hours pass. It's still early in the afternoon here. Also interesting to note, of course, just in front of the building here, these are some of those National Guard members that have really sparked some controversy for being deployed here by the president. You can also see members of Department of Homeland Security, police, as well as some police force that is associated with immigration and customs enforcement. You know, the big news here, of course, was that curfew that was put in place last night by the mayor, Karen Bass, at 8 p.m. That only lasts till 6 in the morning. So right now, no curfew in place for this area of Los Angeles. It's about a 1 square mile radius where people were prevented from gathering last night. We were out on the streets watching as local police officers tried to clear the scene here using a big show of force. Police officers on horseback, large numbers of lines just pushing people out. There were some arrests made last night, about 200 arrests, 2 officers were injured, but I think overall, listening to the mayor speaking to the media today, she said it played out the way that they were hoping, but at the same time, they're going to keep that curfew in place for an undefined amount of time. The hope is that keeping that in place at least for maybe a few more days, that's going to keep things under control, especially when night falls here.
And Carl, what would you say is the mood of the protesters and others who feel perhaps at risk of what ICE and the military might do? I mean, what is the wider sense there?
I don't think that mood has changed. There might be fewer people out here, but there's still a lot of anger over those immigration enforcement actions that we've seen here, and they do continue. We've actually seen some of those raids taking place at a car wash, several different car washes here. We've heard rumors that there was another enforcement operation actually happening earlier just nearby. So those are continuing, and those emotions continue too. And there is some worry, I think, and the mayor touched on this, referring to the curfew and whether or not she'll lift it in the coming days. If those enforcement operations do continue, then we could still see some anger sparking up in Los Angeles. And then the other factor at play here is those Marines that were sent to the area. That's also an issue, and whether or not they'll be deployed here. We got an update from one of the commanders that's associated with that group saying that they're not in the city yet. They are expected to arrive potentially as soon as today, but their role will be similar to the National Guard that are here. They'll be guarding the federal buildings, and they won't be really able to interact with protesters. They'll be more standing back and guarding these buildings.
Carl Nasman for now in downtown LA. Many thanks.
And now to the panels, Stephanie Murphy and Brian Lanza. It is great to see you both. Brian, I want to start with you. The way the situation's being described at the moment in Los Angeles is that things seem to have calmed down a bit. We do have law enforcement, of course, taking care of the protests at night. How do you assess where things stand right now?
So I think it's pretty clear that the overwhelming force that was displayed by the National Guard and the Marines have calmed down the situation. I think the biggest concern was that, like we had during the George Floyd protests, that Democratic governors and Democratic mayors would allow the protests to escalate and get further. And what we learned is President Trump's not going to allow that this time. And his decisive action, whether controversial or not, pretty much stopped the spread of violence throughout
But Brian,
the city.
just quickly, the Federal Guard, National Guard troops, who are federalized, were not taking part in any of the enforcement operations or cracking down on protesters.
It's the show of force. At the end of the day, it's the show of force that matters more than anything else. We've seen how these protesters respond to the show of force, and the show of force matters. I think if you'd had the show of force during 2020, when you had the defund the police movement that took place through the Democratic Party in Democratic cities, we wouldn't have had the burning of federal buildings. We wouldn't have the record assault that took place during these environments. And what President Trump learned from the first time, and what we've known throughout law enforcement practices, is that the show of force is ultimately the deterrent, not the actual actions of that force.
Stephanie Murphy, what do you say to that point? Donald Trump was elected with a promise to crack down on illegal immigration.
As somebody who used to work at the Department of Defense, I understand that for our uniformed military officers and other military personnel, they have been trained in understanding that their role domestically should be very limited. In fact, an 1878 Posse Comitatus Act really prohibit the use of military force, including National Guard, in domestic law enforcement. And so that is going to be a real challenge for the department and for the people who are following these orders. I think a broader issue, though, for the Democrats is that this is a public relations issue. You know, not everybody has an affiliation with the military in the United States, nor do they understand the rules under which we would normally deploy our military. And so it's a hard argument to make. And I think Brian's right that a lot of the George Floyd summer still is sitting pretty prominently in the minds of the American people. And so, you know, I think for the Democrats who are running Los Angeles and California, they need to be able to balance First Amendment rights of American citizens with law and order.
So do you think? Sorry.
Go ahead, Geeta.
Sorry. Do you think Gavin Newsom's position on this is the right one then, Stephanie Murphy?
Gavin Newsom's position on this is the one that is right for him, as he is clearly going to be running in the Democratic primary. And the Democratic base is looking for somebody who is willing to stand up and fight. The other thing that he is right on is that California gives $80 billion more than they receive from the federal government, and they are now funding the very people who are, without the request of the California governor, having military forces within the state. And so he certainly has a right to express the positions that he has, and he is certainly animating the Democratic vote.
Brian, I want to get your take on one of the points that Stephanie just made there about the limited role that the military is supposed to play in domestic situations. Does the Trump administration run a real risk here?
No, listen, I think you've seen presidents over the years use the National Guard. I mean, I'm from California. I remember when the National Guard was deployed during the '92 riots. And that was, you know, we have a history of using military and National Guard to come in these situations. Sure, you know, at the request of the governor, but we also have a recent history.
So the last time they were deployed without the request.
Let me finish my sentence. We also have a recent history of governors neglecting the responsibility of safety and not calling in a National Guard when it's needed, and you only have to go back 4 years to George Floyd. That is the prime example of governors, Democratic blue state governors, being derelict in their duty of protecting the citizens and not wanting to call in the National Guard when you have this crisis. You have Minnesota, Brian, you have Seattle. Seattle took nearly over a month to bring back the normal. And that's because the blue state governor, the Democratic governor, thought it was more important to let these protesters burn their city than to hold people accountable.
But
if
Brian,
that's the position that Stephanie and Democrat governors want to do, sure.
I just want to come back to today's protest, not to the protests during the George Floyd riots at the time that we saw. But I want to talk about what we're seeing now, because Los Angeles police have said that the deployment of troops could provide or pose some logistical challenges, and there wasn't necessarily proof that the LAPD didn't have the situation under control.
I mean, what proof do you need? I saw images of burning cars. I saw images of California Highway Patrol law enforcement's cars being burned. I saw the act of attempted murder where somebody threw a cinder block over the bridge towards a car. I mean, I guess how much violence do you need before you ask these governors to actually do their responsibility? For me, it's the burning of cars. And here's what we ultimately have. Because you have these blue state governors and these blue state mayors who are sanctuary cities proponents and sponsors and champions, they actually don't help federal law enforcement do their job. What were they doing when the start of these riots took place? They were deporting rapists. They were deporting people who've assaulted women, who've assaulted kids. They were deporting people who committed violent acts against old people. If that's what Governor Newsom, if that's what Stephanie, if that's what the Democratic Party wants to defend, we certainly encourage to do that and do that often. But the reality is the vast majority of the country support President Trump's deportations policies. We've seen it in the polling, and they're actually going to support what's taking place in Los Angeles, which is the enforcement of law.
Okay. We'll come back, of course, to talk a little bit more about
the president's deportation policies. This policy of deploying the National Guard without the request of the California governor will also be contested in court.
That could be. We're going to come back to this conversation. There's a lot more to be said here also about the ICE deportation enforcement operations. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So Stephanie and Brian, stay with us.
Yes, around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. Now, whilst hundreds of people have been arrested since the protests in LA began, one has become a rallying cry for immigration advocates around the US. A California Labour leader was arrested on Friday while protesting outside a business that was suspected of employing undocumented immigrants and falsifying employment records.
The criminal complaint says that while federal agents were executing search warrants, David Huerta deliberately obstructed their access to the worksite by blocking their vehicle. He refused to move and was later then taken into custody. His arrest caused union members and immigrant advocates to lead rallies and call for his release in cities including Chicago, New York, and Boston.
Mr. Huerta was released on Monday, but he still faces a federal charge of felony conspiracy to impede an officer. He spoke shortly after his release.
And I just want to tell my members at USWW that I hope, and I don't know if the right word is forgiveness, that it was not my intention to be arrested. That I hope that I have not put them in harm's way.
Let's bring in the panel, Stephanie Murphy and Brian Lanza. We have just a short time to discuss this. Brian, do you think it was a misstep to arrest a union leader there? And because there is a political risk, isn't there, for President Trump, that by bringing in the unions like this, that does attract a wider support base to those opposed to his policy?
Listen, I happen to know David. I've worked in California. I know David really well. And here's what I can tell him and what I tell everybody. Do not impede the actions of ICE officers. If you do, you will get arrested. You will get charged. David has a high probability of being charged with obstruction of justice, with interference of ICE agents, and those are crimes. And he's going to be punished for those crimes. David should be an example to everybody Let ICE do their job. They are working within the law. They're deporting illegal aliens, and most of the illegal aliens they're deporting are rapists, murderers, and violent people. Let them do their jobs and don't interfere. When you interfere, you put yourself with criminal liability. I would not be surprised if David ends up serving time as a result of this. And he did it to himself. He did not need to impede, and that's what he did. And you should have California leaders condemning the impeding of this action. Them not condemning is going to lead to more arrests of leaders such as David. It's a shame that David's going to be arrested. It's a shame that the process is going to be what it is, but he did it to himself.
Stephanie, what do you think about this? To Geeta's point there, of course, the SEIU is a very important union, not just in California, but across the country.
I think it really highlights the fine line that the Democrats have to walk at this moment in protesting, but not feeding the narrative that this administration wants to paint of the party. And the party needs to reclaim the law and order mantle and also stand for our constitutional rights for protest. And they need to be able to do that in a way that is aligned with the rules that exist. And so this, it will be determined by the court system whether or not he committed any crimes, but it is it highlights the fine line that the Democrats have to walk as they try to protest the injustices that they see and exercise their First Amendment rights, while also demonstrating that they can be law-abiding citizens and follow the rule of law.
Brian, I want to come back to the larger picture about the deportation operations here, because you were talking about the type of people who are being detained and deported. One of the issues that we've seen why somebody like David Huerta stepped in there is because there are concerns that workers are getting caught up in this as well. And I just want to read you what Congressman David Valadado, a Republican congressman from California, said. He said he's urging the administration to prioritize the removal of known criminals over the hardworking people who have lived peacefully in the valley for years. What do you think of that?
Listen, David's from the Central Valley, and Central Valley is critical to California's economy, and migrant workers play a role in that. And so the congressman's doing everything he can. I know David really well, and I know what he speaks of. I've worked on those issues, and it's critical. But at the end of the day, whether it's in Los Angeles, whether it's in the streets of Los Angeles, whether it's drug dealers, whether it's rapists or other types of criminals, or whether it's even workers in the Central Valley, we have laws in this country, and the law says that if you're an illegal alien, you can't work, and you're committing state and federal crimes by working. What's wrong with enforcing those laws? I think David has to ask himself that. He certainly has to explain to his constituents. But at the end of the day, we're enforcing federal law, and this is the consequences of federal law. If we do not want these deportation policies to take place, then I encourage Stephanie and the Democrats to go before Congress and say amnesty all over again. But they're going to lose that discussion because the American people don't want amnesty anymore.
Okay, we'll come back to this conversation in just a moment, but we're going to move on to some international focus now, because this all comes as the Trump administration is staking out its foreign policy agenda. We've seen how economic policy, tariffs in particular, have become a central tool of the Trump administration's engagement with allies and adversaries alike. More on that later.
But on national security, the war on Ukraine and the Middle East, fault lines have emerged with the US's traditional allies amid concerns about eroding US influence abroad.
On Capitol Hill today, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth faced questioning from senators over the Trump administration's handling of the war in Ukraine and the president's ties with Russia's Vladimir Putin. The questioning came from including Republican senators. Here's Mitch McConnell.
That America's reputation is on the line. Will we defend Democratic allies against authoritarian aggressors? That's the international concern that I have about this, and I think a number of my members share that view.
Meanwhile, the Financial Times is reporting that the Pentagon launched a review of the 2021 submarine deal with the UK and Australia, which is called AUKUS. According to the FT, the review is intended to determine whether the US should scrap the project, and that has both the UK and Australia concerned.
Now, the BBC did ask for clarification, and a defense official said that the department is reviewing AUKUS as part of ensuring that the initiative of the previous administration is aligned with the president's America First agenda. The official also said that this means that allies step up fully to do their part for collective defense, and that the defense industrial base is meeting our needs. So let's bring in Stephanie Murphy and Brian Lanza again on this. Stephanie, starting with you, what do you think of the prospect that AUKUS, this deal, could be reviewed now to see if it's in line with the Trump administration's America First initiatives?
Well, when I worked at the Department of Defense, I worked on the relationship between the United States and Australia, as well as our Asia-Pacific allies. And that relationship has, been very beneficial to the United States over the years. It is I know that this will be an unfortunate piece of news for our allies who have deployed with us to war zones and have stood by our side in so many different cases, that they are finding that there is uncertainty in the alliance. And so it's an unfortunate element, but the uncertainty is a name of the game in this administration. And so whether it is domestic businesses or foreign allies, this is something that they're starting to do.
Brian Lanza, are you surprised that AUKUS is being reviewed given President Trump's position on China?
No, listen, I think everything needs to be reviewed. I think we've seen every president has that prerogative. We certainly saw President Barack Obama review George W. Bush's policies with respect to Afghanistan and Iraq. We saw President Trump review Obama's policies, and Biden review Trump's. This is a normal process in the system. They're going to do the reviews. They're going to analyze. They're going to see where there's in concert, where changes need to make place. But at the end of the day, the goal is still the same. You still have to counter China. Australia plays a key role in that. The UK play a key role. But there's nothing wrong with making sure that A, it's aligned, and B, if changes need to take place, that we can have those conversations early rather than later.
And to be fair to your point, Brian, we don't know, of course, if the review means that there'd be any change to this agreement. We just understand that it's being reviewed to see if it aligns with the America First policies. But Stephanie, coming back to you, the other point that we were looking at there, which does include, of course, America's reputation abroad, its influence abroad, was the U.S.'s role in efforts to get a ceasefire in the Ukraine war. What do you make of what we've seen in recent weeks, which is just that, at this moment, it doesn't look like the U.S.'s efforts have borne fruit?
Well, it turns out the war wasn't going to be ended on day one of the Trump administration, and the fact that this situation is much more difficult than it looks than it was presented during the campaign. And it doesn't appear that the Trump administration has that much influence over Putin and what he is doing. In fact, he has launched serious attacks that are affecting civilians in response to Ukrainian attacks that were very strategic and very surgical, attacking just the equipment that had been bombing their country. So I find it very unfortunate that America can't be relied upon anymore by Europe or by Ukraine to stand for democracy in countries that can't have our common values.
And Brian Lanza, even if at some point there was to be a deal confirmed, for example, with China that we've heard discussions of on the Middle East, on Ukraine, do you think those adversaries of the US are going to trust any deal that is made?
Listen, I think they have to, right? I mean, the reality is if you're stepping and looking at Russia, and if you're Europe, if you're really scared of Russia's inclusion into Ukraine and worried that it's going to go further, you have to look at it and say, well, why would we secure some type of agreement with China, who's funding this Russian war machine? I think Europe has to sort of look at themselves and make the decision where they want to be in the world today. Trump's pretty clear. President Trump's abundantly clear. He sees China as a direct threat to the status quo of the world order that we see today. China sees themselves as a key player, and Europe seems to be confused. And we need clarity out of Europe.
We're gonna end it there. We'll be back in a few minutes. Brian, Stephanie, thank you so much. From me and Sumi, see you in a few moments. This is The Context.
Hello there. Increasing heat and humidity over the next few days likely to spark off some heavy showers and thunderstorms. Could see some localised flooding with some of these. So Met Office have issued a number of yellow weather warnings across the country. Head online to check all these out. Now, the reason for it, high pressure over the near continent, drawing this warm and humid air from France and Spain, lower pressure in the Atlantic, pushing into this warm and humid air, sparking off these heavy showers and thunderstorms, which will develop tonight across the Channel Islands, southwest England and South Wales. Could see a chance of some localised flooding in places. For most, though, it's a dry and a warm and humid night to come. So plenty of sunshine in central, northern and eastern areas. Showers and thunderstorms across the south and the west, pushing their way northwards into parts of northwest England, Northern Ireland and southwest Scotland. Again, there is a chance of some localised flooding with these torrential downpours. Best of the sunshine towards central, southern and eastern areas, where we'll see highs around the mid-20s. Friday, probably the peak of this heat and humidity, especially in the southeast, where we'll start dry and sunny, but showers and thunderstorms will develop, become more widespread, spreading northwards across the country during the afternoon, some of them very heavy. High 20s in the southeast, one or two spots could hit the 30 Celsius mark, low 20s elsewhere. But it does turn cooler and fresh as we head into the weekend. Temperatures returning closer to the seasonal norm. Few showers in the north and the west, best of the dry weather in the south and east.
Today we're looking at the state of British politics.
Asking, is technology ruining football?
Are we too obsessed with our phones?
Helen from Hull wants to know, how hot's the planet going to get?
And we'll explain why prices keep going up and up.
Also, Rach, did you know space has its own smell?
Really? What of? The world is fast moving and can be confusing.
So let's talk about it.
5 Live Breakfast with Rachel and Rick. Listen on BBC Sounds.
China is an extraordinary country, rich in traditions, and I'm back to immerse myself in its stunning landscapes, steeped in natural beauty. I'll uncover the treasures from ancient civilizations.
This is just pure magic.
As I meet some of the remarkable people celebrating the art and culture that reveal the secrets of China's soul.
To understand what this means for the people who live alongside it has been completely extraordinary.
Join me, Alistair Sook, for China's Greatest Treasures on BBC News.
Resilience is the key word when pursuing a career in music. You just have to have bags of it.
When people say no to you, you don't listen to them. You just do what you have to do and do what you want to do.
I've never called myself as a victim because I feel like I survived one of the most dangerous groups in recent history.
Anytime I think about women's rights in general, I think about the next generation, and I think having a daughter makes it very personal.
If you could write a letter to yourself, what would you say?
I would just say, you're going to make it. You're going to make it.
You're going to make it. You don't know it, but you're going to make it.
100 Women in Conversation across the BBC. Watch on iPlayer.
Welcome back to The Context. I'm Sumi Somaskanda in Washington.
And I'm Geeta Gurumuthy in London. President Trump has endorsed the framework for a trade deal with China, which would see US manufacturers gain access to magnets and rare metals and allow Chinese students to attend American universities. It still requires final approval.
Well, for months now, the world's watched on as the two largest economies faced off in an ever-intensifying trade war. So there's perhaps somewhat of a sigh of relief today with news of a step forward to a trade deal to be signed between the US and China.
Well, in a Morning Truth social post, President Trump said the deal was done, subject to final approval from the two leaders. Donald Trump said the US will get the rare earth metals it needs. In exchange, China will get access to sophisticated US computer chips, and Chinese students allowed to take up their places at American colleges. The recent hike in tariffs will be reversed, total of 55% for the US, 10% for China.
And speaking earlier, US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent seemed optimistic about what's ahead.
But the country needs to be a reliable partner in trade negotiations. If China will course correct by upholding its end of the initial trade agreement we outlined in Geneva, and I believe after our talks in London they will, then the rebalancing of the world's two largest economies is possible.
Let's bring in the panel, Stephanie Murphy and Brian Lanza. Initial thoughts briefly, if we can. Brian, what do you think Trump is going to achieve if this initial deal is signed off?
Further market stability. I think that's the whole point, is to show to the market that these two economic powers, they're off the highway of hell, I call it, economic hell anyway. They found an off-ramp and they're working to ensure that they gain more and more momentum to normalize the relationship. And the normalization of that relationship is China is going to be held more accountable than they've ever been held before. That's a good thing for the American consumer, and that's a good thing for the American worker.
Stephanie, what's your take on this? Because if you look at what we've seen actually announced, it seems that this is a framework for what was agreed in Geneva in the first round of talks. So how optimistic are you?
I think the proof is in the pudding. So far, what we have seen with all of these announcements around trade frameworks is that there's not that many details. I say this as somebody who worked on the trade committee when I was a member of Congress and was involved in negotiating the last major trade deal that was signed by the United States under the Trump administration, which was the trade deal with Canada and Mexico. I understand how complex these trade deals can be. And what I think is a very clear sign that this framework has less substance than it does the media element is that the Chinese have come out to say that this deal, that the conversations were quote unquote candid. When the Chinese call a negotiation candid, what they're saying is that there is a lot of space between where the U.S. is and where they are. So I think it remains to be seen whether or not this is actually a stabilizing or a real trade deal.
We'll talk about that more in just a moment, but there is another set of U.S. industries closely following developments between the U.S. and China. And to discuss how the trade war is impacting U.S. farmers, let's bring in Caleb Ragland, the president of the American Soybean Association. Caleb, it's good to see you again. The last time we spoke, I believe, was shortly after President Trump had unveiled a raft of tariffs on a number of countries, including on China. So just fill us in on how things have been for soybean farmers in the past few months.
Well, Sumi, we really haven't had a lot of change. The soybean exports are very seasonal, and our export season will start here in late August and go till about February. So soybeans aren't exported near as much during the last few months. Prices have stayed pretty stagnant, but we are very concerned. There is also not been much movement on getting a solution to trade with our largest soybean export partner in China. China takes over 25% of the soybeans produced in the United States. And right now, farm prices are weak due to the uncertainty in the market. And while there was some positive news today for the rare earths, the metals, we didn't hear anything about agriculture. And soybeans are the largest agriculture export from the United States, and we're still dealing with uncertainty and a really tough farm economy. So what we're needing is for President Trump and the Chinese leaders to get together and get a deal similar to the Phase 1 agreement they made few years ago during the first trade war, and something that gives certainty to our markets.
Yeah, if you look at what President Trump said, he said, we're getting 55% tariffs on Chinese goods. They're getting 10% tariffs. What kind of knock-on effect does that have literally on your business?
Well, the effect is that our largest export partner has a tax anytime they go to purchase American soybeans. That means that our competition in South America and Brazil and Argentina are much more competitive than we are, and we lose market share to them. Before the first trade war, 1 out of 3 rows of soybeans in the U.S. went to China. Now it's 1 out of 4 rows. But we're concerned that we will lose more market share permanently if we are at a competitive disadvantage, which is the result of the tariffs. Soybeans are a commodity. We're a price taker. Basically, the soybeans from here or from South America are similar. And if they can get a better deal, that's where they're going to go. So tariffs are an obstacle that is in the way that makes us uncompetitive price-wise, and we desperately need those markets. The American farmer is the backbone of the rural economy in America, and rural America is a large part of this country. Rural America does a whole lot of the living and breathing and working and playing and spending that's done. They say every dollar of the ag economy gets spent 6 to 8 times in their rural communities, and this is hurting rural America as a whole. This is going to lead to major economic problems for our country as a whole if we don't get this solved.
Okay, Caleb, always really interesting to get your perspective. Thank you again for joining us on BBC News.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Let's bring in the panel, Stephanie Murphy and Brian Lanza. Brian, what do you say to that, hurting real America with these tariffs from President Trump?
Listen, it's no doubt that the tariff policy or the tariff regime is going to have a short-term impact. I think President Trump has said that. We even saw that short-term impact during Trump 1, during his first term. But I think if you step back and look at the picture, what matters more? A farmer, who's doing a great job and very much a backbone, or some of the American workers who are losing their jobs to the failed economic policies of previous presidents. I think this president said something differently than most Republican presidents, that the status quo doesn't work for him. And voters validated that. And they know what he was going to do and bring in a tariff regime that was hopefully going to recalculate and reset some of the trade policies. And that's the goal. The goal is certainly not to hurt, soybean farmers. And they were hurt a little bit in the first term, but they understand the long-term impact and they're being patient. But at the end of the day, this can't be about the price of soybeans. This has to be about the country. This has to be about our American workers.
Stephanie, I can't help but notice that you were smiling a bit during Brian's answer there. Just tell us what you're thinking on this.
Well, I just think from a political perspective, to ask the question, who's more important, farmers or workers, is a losing argument. Actually,
Fair.
What you need to be, we need to be taking care of all Americans. And what's happening with this tariff policy is that all Americans are hurting. And it's not just soybean farmers. This tariff policy is creating a situation where the world feels that America is not as reliable. They have an acronym for it now. It's called ABUSA, which is anywhere but the United States of America. And as it relates to soybeans, the first Trump administration negotiated deal and never actually saw it manifest itself. So what confidence does anybody have in any of the deals that are being negotiated today that they'll actually manifest themselves? And then secondly, for our foreign markets where our American goods and services are being sold, why would they continue to work with us? Yes, they have to in the interim, but I can promise you, they are rapidly trying to find other alternatives. And China is there to step in to say, hey, we are actually the ones who are being reliable negotiators and reliable partners, because they're taking advantage of this moment that the United States is ceding its power and its position in the world. And it's just unfortunate. It's unfortunate for farmers and it's unfortunate for American workers.
Brian, what do you think of that? The U.S.'s products are part of its influence and its power abroad, its ability to sell soybeans, among other things.
Yeah, listen, I think all of those things matters, but at the end of the day, you have to look at what's been happening with China, right? You can't say that they're honest trading partners. They've never honored the rules of the World Trade Organization. You can't. I'm sorry, I disagree with the Congresswoman. You can't say they're reliable trading partners. What did we learn during COVID? We learned during an international crisis where Stephanie's friends, my friends, your friends were suffering dearly during COVID. What did China do? They hoarded the PPE supplies. They manipulated the system during an international crisis, and that to me says they're not a reliable trading partner. So if Europe, if Brazil, if all these countries want to go to China, and they've got to look at, who's the real reliable partner, how does the U.S. operate and how does China operate? If the choice is even for them, then let them make that choice. But at the end of the day, we just saw during COVID, not that long ago, that during an international crisis, China has proven themselves not to be a reliable partner. And if you need more evidence, just wait, because there's more and more evidence keeps growing every day.
Well, we had more numbers today on inflation. We're going to have a look at that in a moment. Brian, Stephanie, stay with us for a moment. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.
Welcome back. Well, the U.S. is getting a better view of the impact of President's tariffs on the economy. The Labor Department released its monthly inflation report today and found that it remains muted despite those tariffs.
The Consumer Price Index, which measures the cost of goods and services, rose at an annual rate of 2.4% in May, a slight increase from a 2.3% annual rise in April, but less than the 2.5% annual increase economists had predicted.
Now, President Trump reacted to the report positively, posting on Truth Social earlier today saying, quote, CPI just out, great numbers. He also renewed his calls for the U.S. Federal Reserve to lower interest rates.
Let's cross to New York. Our business correspondent Michelle Fleury is following developments for us. Michelle, just give us a bit more on those inflation numbers and the market reaction.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a lot of hand-wringing over tariffs and the implications that they might sort of push up prices. And yet, if you look at this inflation report, so far, the kind of impact of that has been pretty muted. I mean, things that were expected to be affected, like clothing, like new cars, actually saw declines in prices last month. Now, economists I've been speaking to say that's unlikely to last. They do expect to see sort of inflation beginning to kind of pick up over the summer months, in part because of the tariffs. But, if you're looking at the data today, right now, prices pretty muted, a small increase, certainly nothing too worrying on the surface. Markets, though, although they were kind of initially cheered, I think they were kind of, more focused on some of the other news, whether it's trade talks or concerns about what's going on around the rest of the world. And so ultimately, they actually closed lower at the end of the trading day.
For interest rates to be cut, of course.
Yeah, I mean, you just mentioned just now that Donald Trump went back to kind of, one of his favorite themes, which is criticizing the head of America's central bank for not lowering rates as other countries have done. And I think, the Federal Reserve, which actually has a two-day policy meeting next week, again, is still not expected to cut interest rates at this point, to leave them on hold, and that the forecast is simply that they will wait probably until the autumn, until September, October to act. And the reason for that is not just tariffs, but they want to sort of look as a whole and see how Donald Trump's economic policies will ultimately impact. And we haven't really seen any of these things bleed through to the economy. On the one hand, we've talked about tariffs, but there is also immigration, which has implications for the economy. And of course, the big, beautiful bill that's being discussed that kind of would add a bit of stimulus to the economy. What this all means going forward, they want to sort of see before they make any decisions on rates.
Michelle Fleury, thank you very much for that update. Thanks.
And let's bring Stephanie and Brian back in. And Stephanie, despite the tariffs, as we heard from our correspondent there, and some of the impact that immigration deportation enforcement operations have, we're hearing that inflation does seem to be cooling. Do you think that is still temporary and could still change, or it's perhaps a sign that President Trump's policies are having the effect he wanted?
I believe with the economists, as your specialists talked about, that they believe that the impact will be later this year. But I think you have to look at what's happening is that all the economists are predicting slowing GDP with rising costs. And moreover, foreign debt holders are saying that American debt is too risky, that the American Congress today are considering a $4 trillion potentially bill that will put America further behind from a debt and deficit perspective. And so they are pricing up what it costs for Americans to borrow, not to mention that the government this year has to refinance about $7 trillion. And when they have done those bond issuances, you have seen the people who have previously held American debt price that up. So American borrowing is costing more because the people see more risk. They see a slowing GDP, they see rising costs, and they see profligate spending from Washington. And all of that is making things more expensive. It makes things more expensive for people who are looking to get car loans and home loans. It has a trickle-down effect. It's not just like Wall Street math. This actually affects everyday people at their kitchen table.
And Brian Lanza, obviously the cost of living, job security, those are always key factors in any election. They were the promises that President Trump made to bring prices down. And we saw Elon Musk last week when he was putting out his social media messages saying that he predicted a recession in the second half of this year.
Listen, I think we had Goldman Sachs economists predict a recession at the start of Q2. And what do we know today about that Goldman Sachs economist? That they were wrong. What do we know about the economists from Trump's first term, where they predicted recession? They were wrong. All we know at this point is that the economists have no freaking clue of how to predict what's going to happen under Trump's economy. But let me tell you what has happened under Trump's economy. The price of gas has gone down. It's more affordable to the American people. The price of eggs has gone down. It's more affordable to the American people. The stock market today is higher than when it was when he took office. So that's a benefit to the American people. But the most important one, inflation. Inflation today is lower than when he took office. So I understand, Wall Street likes to speculate and Wall Street likes to keep the status quo, but the American people decide how this economy operates. And the American people are saying, we don't buy what Wall Street, we don't buy what Goldman Sachs says, we don't buy what JP Morgan says. We buy the policies of the American president, who have brought prices down and has actually brought inflation down from the day he's taken office. Those to me seem strong economic successes. And let's look at the tariff number with China and the United States. The United States is putting 55% more tariffs on Chinese goods, and Chinese is only putting 10%. A function of math, we're winning that debate on the tariff discussion of altering China's economic policy. So we can talk about long-term debt, we can talk about all these other things, but the voter today feels the economy is better than it was when Trump took office.
Stephanie, in 30 seconds, if you can, do you think Brian is a point there ahead of midterms?
55% tariff is being paid by Americans, so let's be very clear about that. I know that there's a lot of confusion being sowed by the White House about who pays for a tariff, but when a tariff is placed on foreign goods, American consumers pay for that tariff. So that 55%, yes, the U.S. government is collecting it, but they're not collecting it from the Chinese. They're collecting it from the U.S. consumer. So let's be very clear about who is paying for that. And that means that American people are paying more for the goods that they had previously. I'm not sure that that's something to brag about.
Okay. Stephanie Murphy, Brian Lanza, great to have you with us here on The Context as ever. Thank you so much for being with us.
And thank you so much for watching The Context. For Geeta and myself, it's been great to have you with us. Back tomorrow at the same time. Stay with BBC News.
See you soon.
Hello from the BBC Sports Centre. I'm Jane Dougal. It was a dramatic opening day of the World Test Championship final at Lord's, with 14 wickets falling. Kagiso Rabada returned from his drugs ban for South Africa to help bowl Australia out for 212. But South Africa have a mountain to climb. They trail Australia by 169 runs. Rob Heath reports.
Even the great sporting careers can encounter a few bumps in the road. Here's South Africa's Kagiso Rabada. In January, he tested positive for cocaine while playing in a domestic tournament. He was banned for a month. Now he's back.
Gone.
Redemption. Rabada ranks up with the best of all time, and this is why. Khawaja and Green both sent packing, 16 for 2. Good plan to bowl first. And Australia lost another 2 before lunch. Travis Head flicking casually, Carl Verheyen diving magnificently. Batting was tricky, but one man so often finds a way. Steve Smith, a nemesis to bowlers around the world, and here past 50. Smith had dealt with South Africa's best efforts, but suddenly fell to something altogether less threatening. Part-timer Aidan Markram found the edge. Marco Jansen, as surprised as everybody else, juggler turned catcher. After that, Australia simply collapsed. Bo Webster top scored with 72, but he fell to that man, Rabada. After that bump in the road in January, Rabada's back on the highway. But South Africa's joy was tempered by the loss of 4 wickets at the start of their innings. This ultimate test is certainly providing ultimate entertainment. Rob Heath, BBC News.
Emma Raducanu and Katie Boulter's doubles partnership at Queen's came to an end after 2 matches with defeat in the quarter-finals. The Brits lost 6-2, 7-5 to top seeds Leeuwyd Kitchenok and Erin Routliffe in front of a packed Court 1 at Queen's Club in London. They were outclassed in the first set as Ukraine's Kitchenok and New Zealand's Routliffe, who've won 3 Grand Slam double titles between them, raced to a 4-1 lead before taking the set with another break 3 games later. Sonny Kurtal's run at the Queen's Club Championships is also over after she was beaten in straight sets by Amanda Anisimova. 2 days after recording the biggest win of her career, the Brit had no answer to the 8th-seeded American, who dominated from the off en route to a 6-1, 6-3 victory in just over an hour. Anisimova will face fellow American Emma Navarro in the quarterfinals. Female tennis players who want to freeze their eggs or embryos to start a family at a later date will have their ranking protected while they take time out of the game. The offer is open to any player ranked in the world's top 750 who spends more than 10 weeks out of competition. It'll also apply to up to 3 tournaments within 10 weeks of their return. However, British number 7 Heather Watson says having children whilst on tour looks like it would be extremely challenging.
I mean, I look at people like Tatiana Maria and Victoria Azarenka. Honestly, they're superwomen. If I could do that, great. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see how life pans out.
Golf and Masters champion Rory McIlroy says this week's US Open venue Oakmont felt impossible as recently as last week. The world number 2 revealed he shot 81 during a practice round last Monday, although he added the following day he found it not quite so fearsome a challenge.
No one knows how they're going to feel after they do something they've been waiting their whole lives to do. So, and yeah, you know, if I can't allow myself this little bit of a grace period to sort of enjoy what I've done, then, you know, why do we do it? You know, why do we try to achieve these things if you can't enjoy them?
The British and Irish Lions have begun preparations for their tour to Australia, though it's a slimmed-down squad that's met for a training camp in Portugal. The 3 tests are more than a month away, but their first game together is in 9 days' time. Prop Ellis Genge says he's throwing himself into the culture.
You want to immerse yourself in what will be a great culture, you know, and sort of try and be out there with the boys as much as you can. Like, I'm a bit of a recluse, I guess, in a sense. Like, I like being in my room after training and sort of relaxing, but trying to get out, play cards, go for coffee, just be around the boys as much as you can, because firstly, you want to learn off them. Secondly, you got to play with them. Thirdly, you're going to be with them for 8 weeks or so like, you better like them. But yeah, at the moment, yeah, everyone's been brilliant.
And that's the sport for now. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.
Hello there. Increasing heat and humidity over the next few days likely to spark off some heavy showers and thunderstorms. Could see some localised flooding with some of these. So Met Office have issued a number of yellow weather warnings across the country. Head online to check all these out. Now, the reason for it, high pressure over the near continent, drawing this warm and humid air from France and Spain, lower pressure in the Atlantic, pushing into this warm and humid air, sparking off these heavy showers and thunderstorms, which will develop tonight across the Channel Islands, southwest England and South Wales. Could see a chance of some localised flooding in places. For most, though, it's a dry and a warm and humid night to come. So plenty of sunshine in central, northern and eastern areas. Showers and thunderstorms across the south and the west, pushing their way northwards into parts of northwest England, Northern Ireland and southwest Scotland. Again, there is a chance of some localised flooding with these torrential downpours. Best of the sunshine towards central, southern and eastern areas, where we'll see highs around the mid-20s. Friday, probably the peak of this heat and humidity, especially in the southeast, where we'll start dry and sunny, but showers and thunderstorms will develop and become more widespread, spreading northwards across the country during the afternoon, some of them very heavy. High 20s in the southeast, one or two spots could hit the 30 Celsius mark, low 20s elsewhere. But it does turn cooler and fresh as we head into the weekend. Temperatures returning closer to the seasonal norm. Few showers in the north and the west, best of the dry weather in the south and east.
Be ready. Change can happen in an instant. Check on the BBC Weather app.
The key question is, where do we begin? Who do you want to go for?
It went up. You can't be proud of that.
Indeed, it did go up.
And you are making the choice not to do that. That's right, isn't it?
Big questions.
Isn't that the definition of political opportunism?
Unmissable moments.
Classic BBC there. Classic. Oh, yeah.
Newsnight.
Thanks, everyone.
With Victoria Derbyshire. Weeknights at 10:30 on BBC Two and iPlayer.
This is frontier country.
Broaden your horizons.
If this is what being a 21st century nomad is all about, sign me up.
Caribbean's relationship with the seas are changing and deepen your understanding.
What must it have been like for them, not knowing whether they were going to make it?
How important is this region?
If something starts changing here, we see the change all over the world.
This is just incredible.
The Travel Show. Watch on BBC iPlayer.
Tonight at 10, the Chancellor sets out how she plans to spend more than £1 trillion of public money over the next 4 years.
In place of decline, I choose investments. In place of pessimism, division and defeatism, I choose national renewal.
The Chancellor has completely lost control. This is the spend now, tax later review.
From health, transport and housing to large infrastructure projects, we'll be taking you through the plans. Also tonight. Violence spreads to another town in Northern Ireland. A leisure centre in Larne is set alight this evening.
And here in Ballymena, there's now a third night of violence. Police have asked for help from other forces to deal with the trouble.
6-month-old Siwa, whose photo in Gaza shocked the world. Now we're with her on her journey to Jordan to receive vital medical care.
And so Siwar has just arrived. She's now going to be taken to a man where there'll be a diagnosis and the beginning of her treatment.
And Brian Wilson, who created the unique sound of the Beach Boys, has died at the age of 82.
On Newsnight at 10:30 tonight, we'll bring you fresh insight on the stories of the day with big interviews and our regular panel of Newsnighters. And of course, look at what the papers are saying about tomorrow's news.
Hello, welcome to the BBC News at 10. The Chancellor has laid out how she's going to divide more than £1 trillion of public money between government departments over the next 4 years. In her spending review, which looks at longer-term funding and is separate to the budget, Rachel Reeves also set out more than £100 billion in additional funding for future projects, including nuclear power, defence and transport. Overall, government department budgets will grow by 2.3% above inflation per year, but not all. Some, including the Department for the Environment, the Foreign Office and the Home Office, will get less, while defence, health and science and technology get more. The NHS in England gets an extra £29 billion a year for day-to-day running. That is more than was expected. There is £39 billion for social and affordable housing in England over 10 years. And the Chancellor said that hotels would no longer be used to house asylum seekers by 2029, saving £1 billion a year. The Conservatives described the Chancellor's plans as a spend now, tax later review. Our political editor, Chris Mason, has the story of the day.
This wasn't a budget day and had none of its fanfare, or tax rises, or hikes in the cost of a pint.
When will we feel better off, Chancellor?
But one question, that one, still dominating, the biggest of all for Rachel Reeves.
I call the Chancellor of the Exchequer to make a statement. Rachel Reeves.
We are renewing Britain. But I know that too many people in too many parts of our country are yet to feel it. And the purpose of this spending review is to change that.
The emphasis today was on long-term spending, capital spending as it's known, or investment as the Chancellor repeatedly called it, including this on what's described as affordable housing in England.
I am proud to announce the biggest cash injection into social and affordable housing in 50 years. A new affordable homes programme in which I am investing £39 billion over the next decade.
Also absolutely key today, how much money would be set aside for the health service in England. About £4 in every 10 of public spending day-to-day goes on the NHS, so how it fares has a big knock-on for everything else.
I am proud to announce today that this Labour government is making a record cash investment in our National Health Service, increasing real terms day-to-day spending by 3% per year for every single year of this spending review.
That is a generous increase compared to plenty of other budgets, and why there are squeezes elsewhere we heard rather less about from Rachel Reeves.